So, Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Ian. So I'm Michaela Reaney, and I am the founder of a company called Opportunity Global, and I also run TEDx Teesside Women as well. So the Opportunity Global part of my world is a learning and development company. I've worked in learning and development for 15 years now, with lots of different corporates. So I was at Rio Tinto, State Street, before working obviously with clients, myself in my own business. And scarily, I've actually been in entrepreneurship for 10 years now. So starting, scaling, I've sold a business. I've also closed a business as well, which was pretty brutal. And the thing I'm really focused on at the moment is supporting people to really think about the things that they're avoiding in their life and business. So the difficult conversations, the things that kind of get that kind of sweaty hand feeling and a bit of a nervous tummy, and we're not quite sure how to handle them. And I think by facing some of that stuff that we're avoiding, that's where the magic is. That's where we can really start to get the things that we want, desire, and deserve in life as well. So that's my kind of area of focus at the moment.
Excellent. Well, welcome along and
Thank
thanks
you.
for taking this opportunity. This is the second one of these that I've done. I think you've seen the first one. The first one was about managing difficult people. Today, I want to talk about managing difficult circumstances. So I guess that's something that you're familiar with.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So fire away. What are your initial thoughts about managing difficult
Yeah,
circumstances?
I think two kind of experiences probably spring to mind. One from a kind of a life and a kind of health perspective, and one from more of a business as well. And, there's been lots of different variations in between as well, but there's kind of two big moments that stand out for me. I think one on the kind of business side of things is, we spoke briefly about it before, going through the process of accepting and acknowledging that we need to close the business because we'd gone through quite a long, very expensive kind of six-figure investment in legal fees battle with the government. We weren't paid, we lost the contract, there was all sorts of circumstances around it. And I think that was quite a pivotal moment for me because I really had to do that kind of inward inspection of like, how do I deal with this situation? Like, it's something that I'd never come across before, but also people don't talk about it. They don't really, I think I've heard you say before, Ian, people don't talk about the hard times that
They
much.
don't.
So I had no frame of reference of like, okay, how do you handle this situation? How do I support the team? How do I support myself as well?
What are the priorities?
Yeah, like how do you navigate that? So that was quite a difficult circumstance because it it brings up everything as well that you hope that you don't think about yourself. But
Yeah.
like inner critic goes off the charts, like like you wouldn't believe, and there's a lot of shame I think associated with it, and you feel like a failure and all of those things. So you're kind of navigating the personal stuff, but while also like you are the leader of that business. So you don't have time to fall apart. I know people who've shared with me that they've been in organizations where, similar circumstances have happened and they've got the leaders and directors just crying on phone calls, but not actually doing anything to help support their team or to move it forward. So I was very conscious of like, how did I want to show up? Not only for myself, but for my team as well. And I think that I learned so much about myself. Like,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And face stuff about myself that I didn't really like as well.
So what's the biggest learning from all of that, do you think, for you?
Honestly, Ian, I'm still, maybe I don't know yet, because it's still kind of, we closed the business just over 12 months ago. Some of that I'm still dealing with the fallout from as well. So it's still very, very fresh. And I think I'm still going through the process of unpicking it and learning. But I think the thing that I've noticed so far is this bit that I talked about briefly in the intro is like facing the stuff that we're avoiding in life or the conversations. I do think there's power in doing that and moving through it rather than maybe what I've done, in the past where I've maybe wanted to keep the peace or worried about people's reactions, worried about whether people will like me. Am I allowed to swear? I just thought I'd check that.
Feel free.
I really don't give a shit anymore what people think of me. And I think there's great freedom in that, you know, like for the first time ever in my life, I finally like myself. And so whatever happens or whatever situation I deal with, that's now my kind of central point, if that makes sense, to go from. And that feels different to me. It feels very freeing. It's scary as well though, because to get to that, as I say, I've had to deal with stuff that, you know, I haven't always liked about myself and actually do something about it.
Yeah. I think that's the only way you do get to that point.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
You know, you don't stumble on it. You've got to go through some crap to get there. You've got to kiss a few frogs. You do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes maybe you don't even know what that hard stuff is until you're kind of in the messiness of it or out the other side of it. Like hindsight's such a powerful thing, isn't it? But I think because part of this, I still feel like I'm in it. That's different to me as well, because I think that bit of progression, hopefully, that I've made in my life is that I'm like growing through it rather than growing after it, if that makes any sense. But so it's things like finding joy even while things are tough and difficult. Like, how do we do that as individuals? How do we do that as leaders? And you know, I think that's something that I think I've heard you talk about when you did your podcast actually with Charlotte. I know you talked a lot about kind of what happiness means and those moments of joy. How do we find those even when things are really shit?
And I think personally, I think there's a big onus on each and every one of us to find that in ourselves.
Yeah, it's our responsibility.
It's got to be. Nobody can do that for us.
Yeah.
As you're talking there, there's a phrase going through my mind. There's a saying, circumstances maketh the man.
Or the woman.
Or the woman, yeah, I knew you'd say that. But I think that, you know, that's not quite true. But circumstances reveal us to ourselves.
I like that, Ian.
And I think if you polled pretty much everybody and really got honest, they would say that they grew most when times were difficult.
Yeah.
When circumstances were difficult. And I think there's a tendency I'm sure there's a tendency for all of us to wish for an easy life. But that's not where the growth is.
Yeah.
You know, as Marshall Goldsmith says, there's no growth in the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And there's no comfort in the growth zone. So if we're in those difficult circumstances, almost by definition, that's a growth area. Whether we choose to view it as such and take advantage of it, I think is a different question. But it's difficult times that cause us to grow.
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting mental dichotomy there.
Yeah, and I think when you're first in a circumstance, that, if I'm really honest, that isn't how I felt. Like it was just like shit hit the fan and it's like you're just in it.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking about, oh, this is a great growth moment. Lucky me. What's going to be the outcome? You're thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? And I think it's as you go through those days, those weeks, those months, even years, that you pick different things up as you go, don't you, about the experience. And I think part of it has to be accepting that situation for what it is. And I think that's probably my second biggest learning, is accepting that situation, that there was things that I could have done better. Absolutely. There are things that we did wrong. Yeah, for sure. But there was also a hell of a lot of stuff that was completely out of our control.
Yeah.
And you can get quite bitter about that. You can think, why me? You know, people say, don't they, like, it's happening for you. And you're like, yay. But at the moment, that's not how it feels. It feels like someone's like conspiring against me. But I think it's only as you start to go through it that you think, well, you know, no one's coming, right? You know, what you said about responsibility is so true. And you've got to do something about it. And I think we're all responsible for like our own story, and like it doesn't have to be the end of that story. And I think in my 20s and early 30s, I think I was more kind of finite about things, maybe like that. Okay, so this is my business now and this is what I'm doing and I want it to be this thing. But actually, the joy of life is that you can change your mind, you can do something different, you can choose something different. And we always have that option to keep choosing. And I appreciate, that's quite a privileged thing to say as well, as a white cisgendered woman.
Yeah.
But I do think there's power in, accepting the things that you can't change, but then the things that you can change, you've got to do something about it. You can't just keep moaning about it and hoping someone's going to save you.
And that's the serenity prayer, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it is.
Funnily enough, just on the other side of this wall, I've got it nailed up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How funny.
And the reason for that is that it actually happened during COVID. There was such a big temptation for all of us to just moan and woe is me. And I just figured, well, there's certain stuff that you can't change.
Yeah.
So why moan about it? But the stuff that you can change, get stuck in and make stuff happen.
Yeah.
So that kept going through my mind. So I eventually went on Amazon and got a plaque which is behind me when I'm doing a Zoom call.
And it's a good reminder.
Oh yeah, because I think it is just so important to change the things that you can and accept the things that you can't. Trying to do anything else is just going to send you around the twist.
Yeah. Why aren't we taught this stuff in school though, Ian?
Well, yeah, that's a whole different subject. It really is.
That's a different conversation.
I mean, there are so many things that over the years I've learned, people have learned, and we say, well, why weren't we taught that at school?
Yeah.
What do you think the role of a leader is in what we're calling difficult circumstances?
Oh, I think there's probably a few things. I think one of the main things is that you need to be really transparent with people, and that is quite difficult in terms of sometimes people don't want to hear the truth.
Sometimes.
Yeah. They say that they want a transparent leader, but then actually the reality of that is that you then hear it all, warts and all. And I think as a leader, it's quite a thing to navigate what that balance is, because I think there's certain points in certain circumstances when you physically can't tell everything to everyone, especially when you're in like a legal situation or something where that would be, inappropriate. But you need to, as a leader, I think, really be as open and honest as you can, and just be really clear with people. Like, clear is kind. You can't, in a difficult circumstance, people don't want any more ambiguity, in my opinion. Like, any form of change is challenging for people.
Yep.
But when it's change that's potentially got negative consequences for them, then the last thing that they need is for you to be telling them part of an information, half a story, not quite getting to the point, dancing around the subject, whatever it might be. And I think you've got to be really clear. And that means you need to do a lot of work yourself quite quickly to understand and get clear on what's next. And it might be that you don't know the full story, you don't have all of the answers. And I think you need to say that.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I think too many people, because they don't have all the answers, then they don't say anything. And I think the other thing, which I really recognise, is you've got to communicate and over communicate and keep communicating. So even if to you as the leader it feels like you've said it kind of 100 times, do it another 20. Because to the other people listening, particularly when it's quite emotive or quite stressful, people aren't necessarily absorbing or taking the information in, or they need to hear it in lots of different ways until maybe it kind of resonates for them. So yeah, they're the couple of things that spring to mind straight away.
Yeah, I think that certainly that was my advice during lockdown. Talk to your people as much as you can.
Yeah.
Tell them everything that you can. Don't make it up.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, say you don't know.
Yeah.
Years ago, I ran a business, and almost overnight it was a Leyland truck franchise. And literally overnight, DAF from Holland bought Leyland.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly I had 80 people. We woke up on the Monday morning, didn't have a franchise.
Yeah, great.
And I mean, it wasn't dissimilar to COVID, apart from the fact that it was only us. It wasn't
Yeah.
the whole world. And I just got the guys and girls together and said, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but what I will do is I'll tell you everything I know
Yeah.
as I know it, and just have faith. And, you know, it took about a month till we had that situation secured. Nobody left. Nobody panicked. We carried on serving the customers because, of course, the customers wanted to know what was happening as well. And I'm really, really proud about that. You know, I thought, and I was only a young man at the time, I thought that that was a job well done. Little did I know that was going to be just one of a whole series of difficult circumstances. But that bit about being transparent, being clear. There used to be a plaque on the wall that said clarity's power in a previous office. Being as clear as you can about stuff is essential. Of course, it's maybe a bit easier for me than for you, because you describe yourself as a, what was it, reformed people
Recovering
pleaser?
people pleaser, yeah. Recovering is the key part, Ian.
And it's a journey, and I'm less of a people pleaser. I'm more likely to be as subtle as a flying mallet, but it is important, I think, to be as open and honest as you can be. And for me, it's also in how you deliver that news.
Yeah.
You know, that, and I think a big part of this is emotional intelligence. Understanding how your words are going to come across to other people, what they're going to hear. And you make a great point. You've got to repeat yourself so many times, because what people will hear on the 13th iteration is very different from what they'll have heard on the first.
Yeah. And I think the other key part of that is, as a leader, whether it's difficult circumstances or, you know, things are great, you've got to be a good listener. And I think listening is one of the most underrated skills in every part of our life, whether it's relationships, business, family stuff. Like, that ability to really listen and actually understand what good listening means as well is really important. So a lot of what we did through that situation was, you know, just have sessions where we were just listening, you know, and actually not really telling them anything, just asking good questions to help support them through the process, and vice versa. And that was quite I think an eye-opener for me, because what we heard in those sessions, like, we finally got to the bottom of what people were worrying about, basically. And that helped, because I think for a little while people were like, you know, we all worry, like, what does it mean for me?
Yeah.
Like, what's the impact on me? And when you can't tell people something certain, then that's when gossip or other kind of negative
fills the void,
things.
doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. So by having those sessions, I think that allowed us to really dig into and listen, and also get better at listening. You know, hopefully my previous business partner isn't watching this, but often she wasn't the best of listener. You know, she would interrupt people when they were talking and all of those things. And I think that was a real lesson for both of us, in that it allowed both of us to practice our skills better as well at listening. And she would say that herself.
And just reverting back to what we were talking about earlier, there's something that people don't teach you at school.
Massively.
Listening.
Yeah. Or in the workplace, let's be frank, you know. I mean, bearing in mind I've been in the L&D world for so long, and I've seen it in kind of corporate scaling companies, SMEs, startups. I've never seen anyone really do a deep dive into how we get better at listening. And I honestly think one of the things that we can do for each other is listen to each other. Like, what feels better as a human than feeling like someone's listening to you, and that you've been heard, that you've been seen, and you've been understood? Like, that really is the fundamentals of being a great leader, making your team feel like that. And, you know, you're not going to do that every day of the week. Let's be realistic. You might find that some of your team are a bit pissed off with you when things are difficult or whatever else. But if they at least feel like you're listening, then that for me is a really important value.
Well, I think it was Mary Kay Ash that said, imagine everybody's got a sign around their neck that says, make me feel important.
Yeah.
And the most fundamental way of making somebody feel important is to listen to them.
Yeah.
Honour their words.
Ian,
Yeah.
how do you remember all of these phrases? You're incredibly good
Well,
at remembering these all.
You know, I've been doing this for 19 years
Yeah.
now. I collect quotes, but also I get to use them so often.
Yeah.
Because for me, a quote is a bit like a golden nugget. And if it really resonates, I don't
Yeah.
have to try hard to
Yeah.
remember it, to be honest with you.
It's impressive.
But I love that quote. And if I can use it to help people to understand the importance of just listening, just honouring somebody, then I've made a slight improvement in the world,
Yeah.
I think. So getting back to difficult circumstances,
Yeah.
what other learnings have you got?
Out of that one or other
out
ones?
of the whole thing?
I think if I think of the other example I was going to share with you, which is the one kind of around my health and navigating that difficult circumstance. So you might have seen, if you've listened to Charlotte's podcast, I have chronic heart failure, and I have a heart condition. So that means that I've had a couple of 3 heart surgeries, and you know, I had to obviously take time off work to do all of those things, navigate what that new normal meant. And if I'm really honest, Ian, something I only figured out about myself about the time that Charlotte interviewed me, which wasn't very long ago, is that I'd actually been avoiding talking about that, facing it. And so talking about difficult circumstances and how we do this avoidance thing, that was a big thing for me that I've avoided. And it's only probably since I spoke to Charlotte, so she's a big help to me, that I've really started to process like that level of trauma. And, you know, I've had some therapy and other healing things, and I've worked with my coach on it as well. And I didn't realize how much of an effect it had on me, because I basically just put it in a box over here. And it was just too hard to kind of deal with. And also I think in your 20s, you feel quite invincible as well, don't you? And you don't really think about, well, I certainly didn't, about longevity and things like that. So I think what I've learned about myself in that situation is that, you know, I finally give a shit about longevity, which is great. I'm probably finally taking my health more seriously. And I don't just mean the usual kind of like, we all want to be thin, we want to exercise more, we want to eat better. Like more the kind of stuff that wider has an impact, like definitely stress is a big thing. So for me, being able to manage, I'll correct that. For me to be able to reflect on and understand how I behave in a stressful situation and the impact that stress has on me, on my physical kind of self, as well as my mental health, it's then helped me to kind of understand that more about myself, understand maybe the things I need to do to prevent that happening again, but also when bad things do happen or difficult circumstance, because let's face it, that won't be just the one thing and done.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then I think I know a bit more of the kind of coping strategies or the things that I maybe need to put into place. So a simple thing that I keep referring back to is that I get to choose how I experience things. And that little frame of reference has been so valuable to me, because even when things have been difficult, and even when I'm in the thick of that kind of moment of overwhelm or stress or burnout, I can really kind of anchor myself back to saying, okay, but I get to choose how I experience this. Like, this is my responsibility to choose that. And I get to navigate that how I see fit. And that's just a simple thing, but it's something that I keep coming back to. And that's something I've definitely learned. And I think the other thing is just like accepting that, you know, my health is different to someone of my age, you know, but one thing I'm super proud of, Ian, is that I got my checkup a couple of weeks ago, and my blood pressure is the lowest it's ever been in my life.
Wow.
And I'm the oldest I've ever been.
Yeah. Because we don't get any younger, do we?
Exactly, unfortunately. So that for me was a real physical kind of, you know, tick
Yeah.
for me to say, God, like whatever has been, and if anyone looked at it, they'd say, actually, the last 12 months and 18 months have probably been, the hardest I've ever had in business ever. And yet my blood pressure now is the lowest it's ever been. And I think that's because of the things I've done, the steps I've put in place. I've stopped drinking alcohol because that has a big impact on my stress and how I feel and all of that stuff. So it's all interlinked, isn't it? But
It is.
I
But
took it for granted before.
I think the interesting thing is the realization that actually that's my choice.
Yes.
My condition may not be my choice, but
Yeah.
how I react to it definitely is.
Yes, that's a really good way of thinking of it. Yeah, definitely. Because I think for a long time, the cardiologist would say to me, I'd go into an appointment, I'd be like, so how are you? What's been going on? And they'd be like, yes, we're fine, but let's talk about you. And that again is like a bit of an avoidance strategy, right? I didn't really want to talk about it. And I can't believe I'm going to admit this, but it got so bad that I kind of wasn't maybe fully present in those conversations, that my other half and my mum had separately talked about this, and they didn't feel that I was telling them the whole truth about what the cardiologist was saying about how my condition was progressing, how I was. So really embarrassingly, the last few kind of checkups I've had, my other half comes with me.
I was going to say.
Because they don't trust that it's not that I'm not fully present, but I think I do something where I keep doing like, oh, there's people that have way worse than me. Like, this is fine. Like, I can deal with this. It's absolutely fine. And maybe there was a bit there that I wasn't quite accepting, and I was avoiding a bit of it. And, what it means for as I get older, what it means for me, if I wanted to be a mother or things like that, And so, yeah, they don't trust me now.
But isn't it great that you've got that level of self-awareness, that you've now at least got a clue about what you might be doing?
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
Unconsciously.
Yeah. But maybe I think I've only, like, as I say, unpicked that very, very recently. And my last heart surgery was, I think, in 2010, if I remember rightly. So it's a good while ago.
But yeah, the more we know ourselves, the more able we are to spot ourselves when we're fooling ourselves.
And maybe, I don't know if you found this, Ian, but the part of that growth that you mentioned before, that you kind of experience when you go through difficult things, that's where I've also found out the most about myself as well.
Without a shadow of a doubt. It's always, as I think I said earlier, it's, when you talk to people, they've always grown most. That incident I was talking about, I grew hugely. Every time there's a difficult circumstance, somebody once asked me what my thoughts were post lockdown as we came out of that, and my thoughts were quite simply, I was astounded at how flexible and agile so many businesses were.
Yeah.
Because that went on in my mind for a couple of years, and people survived. I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and he said his business grew by 80% during COVID. And I think people's attitude to those difficult circumstances was really the key to whether things went well or didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a bizarre situation because I used to do an awful lot of networking, and of course, come COVID, that was out the window. And I was in my office, and I was on LinkedIn, and I saw a picture of a previous client, and I just dropped him a note saying, I hope everything's going all right. I hope you're still continuing to scale. And within minutes, I got back an absolute tirade about how difficult life was and how his business was really struggling. And because we were in lockdown, my world had suddenly shrunk. Everything was on the computer. So I was only speaking to a few people, but I had 2 or 3 clients that were in very similar businesses, and their businesses were literally going gangbusters.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what's the difference? And I'd love to be able to say the difference was me in my coaching.
I'm sure it was, Ian.
Well, I am as well, but really the difference I think was the mental attitude.
Yeah.
You know, the people that stayed with the program were determined, and some of them were very vocal about, I'm just going to survive, and when I
Yeah.
come out the other side, I'll be stronger. Whereas this guy was much more of a victim mentality.
It's a
So
dangerous mentality, isn't it?
it is, and the ability to notice it is priceless, because
Yeah.
if you don't notice it, you can't do anything about it.
No, definitely. Yeah, we grew in COVID, and we like doubled headcount, we doubled revenue and profit. It was amazing. And it was because we were so agile, like we responded really quickly. So some of the bigger organizations out there that were our competitors, they just couldn't.
Yeah.
And so we were able to kind of be quite nimble and almost a bit stealth with it a
Yeah.
little bit. And I think because half of our team had already been working remotely, that wasn't like a whole new thing for everyone. And we
Yeah.
already had the systems and the processes in place so that that would work effectively. So we could respond quite quickly. And this is probably terrible to say because there was a lot of hard stuff as well during COVID, absolutely,
Without a doubt.
100%. But I actually really enjoyed being a leader during COVID because I enjoyed the challenge of it. I enjoyed that kind of, it felt very pacey. It felt like your clients were being really pacey as well, and you know, those that had maybe been quite traditional or quite stuck in their ways on certain things, they weren't able to be anymore. And so suddenly you kind of saw lots of innovation, lots of technology being used that was making things much more productive, but also like giving people the flexibility that they wanted in their lives. I mean, gosh, I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for people like homeschooling. Loads of our team were, you know, all of this awful things that people going through, you know, people being ill, but there was also a sense of camaraderie between everyone, and that kind of community feel seemed to come back, where people were looking out for each other more, people were checking in with each other more.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing that I'm feeling a little bit now in 2024. I think we've lost
We've forgotten
some
very
of
quickly,
that.
haven't we?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
actually that was the really good stuff that happened. And I think the leaders that really were leaning into those uncomfortable conversations with their team, the ones that were picking up the phone, were being in regular contact, they were the ones that, you know, really saw a difference in their business. But I remember speaking to friends who, you know, they hadn't spoken to their manager in corporate for like 6 months. They were just avoiding them.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to
But
me.
I think that's, and I'm generalizing now, I know that, but I think that's a big difference between corporate and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurs typically are used to being agile.
Yeah.
So problem, sort it. I mean, in many of the businesses that I work with, they hardly missed a beat. They might have had to pivot. Even my local pub, you know, he came out of it because of the restrictions. He ended up converting effectively the backyard into a dining area. So he doubled his table space.
Yeah, his capacity. Brilliant.
And there were so many innovative ways of working that I was seriously impressed. But I do think we've lost a bit of that. We've certainly lost a lot of that community spirit.
Yeah.
Which we're worse off for having lost, I would have said.
I agree. Definitely. I think we want it back, don't we, now?
Well,
more
not
than
COVID.
Ever. No, the community bit, that human connection. Like,
Yeah.
I do think that's what people really, really want, especially in this world where like technology is advancing at an unbelievable rate. We've got AI, and you know, a lot of this stuff is really great when used ethically, but it also means that there's a real reduction in that human stuff. And I think that's why I'm really passionate about the human skills bit, because they're the kind of fundamentals, they're the behaviors, the basics that we've got to get right in any workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, we're going to come back to listening, aren't we? You know, when I was thinking about this conversation, one of the thoughts that went through my mind is, well, hang on a minute, aren't all circumstances difficult? you know, the sea's very, very rarely calm.
Hmm.
And if I think about that, that means that, all right, we've had COVID, we've had your business closing down, we've had my business losing its franchise. Clearly, we're going to hit stormy waters
Hmm. At
in the
some
near
point,
future.
yeah.
What do you think the lessons that you're going to take forward are?
You're gonna laugh, but definitely listening more. And I think one of the reasons I really want to listen more is because I think thinking of the future, we've got this whole new generation coming into the workplace. You know, we're in a situation where we'll have potentially 5 generations
Yeah.
in one working environment. And I think the what Gen Z, for example, are expecting from the workplace, from leaders, what they want from their lives is potentially very different to what some other people in the organization will want. And so I think as a leader, there's also that kind of preempting some of this stuff. Like, how are you going to succession plan that? How are you going to potentially navigate those conversations where people, you know, they're very clear on the values that they expect their organization and their leaders to have. You know, they're very clear on climate change, sustainability, you know, equity and inclusion, all of this good stuff. Like, as a leader, are you ready to navigate that? Because there will be conversations that will be coming up in your workplace, whether with you directly or with your team. And how are you going to navigate that yourself? But also, how are you going to help your team navigate those conversations too? Because I think for too long, some leaders, again, put it in the kind of too hard box.
Yeah.
And think we'll worry about that later, or you know, we'll sprinkle in some mental health first aiders. They'll all go on a one-day program and the world will be fixed. We'll tick a few boxes. We'll do some unconscious bias training, which is my other bugbear. But actually, we won't fundamentally change
anything. Yeah.
any of the behaviours or the everyday actions of our people in our team. And I think as the workplace evolves, you know, it can't be any more that it's just the people at the top. We've got to have the contributors part of the conversation. They want to be listened to. They want a voice. So how, as a leader, do you try and almost like, you know, preempt some of this stuff and start putting things in place before it becomes a difficult situation, or before you lose people or can't hire them in?
Yeah. I've got a, I hear what you're saying. I've got a slightly different view about,
Yeah.
you know, those generations. I mean, that's with us now. And I get that, but kind of instinctively, I just dislike generalizations.
Hmm.
So for me, the only solution is, as human beings, as leaders, we've got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And, you know, you might be of the same generation as somebody else, but they won't see the world the same as you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all unique.
And I think a real fundamental skill is that flexibility to be who you need to be vis-a-vis the person that you're talking to,
Yeah.
and to give them what they individually need. And at that point, the whole generational discussion to me falls apart. It's
person to person, isn't
person
it?
to person.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a student, I studied English language and particularly dialectology. And I get the fact that more so in those days, people from a certain area spoke in a certain way. But actually, you could have two people living next door to each other that had a noticeably different idiolect. One person, there might be a lot of overlap,
Yeah.
but their language was very different, really, to the person next to them. And that's what I carry into this, that it's really about being able to meet people where they are, understand what their expectations are. And I think that's a huge skill.
They've got to be good listeners to be able to do that, right?
You
Because
keep bringing
otherwise,
this back.
but it's true. Like, otherwise, we make assumptions.
Oh, hell, I.
You know,
Yeah.
people make assumptions. They have their own bias. they have their own lived experience, you know, the kind of backpack that we're all carrying around with the stuff that's happened to us. And so I think to do that, like, I think we're talking about the same thing, but using different language. So, you know, you talk about meeting people where they're at, which I love. And I also talk about, you know, making people feel seen and heard and valued. And for me, they're the two things that are completely combined. And I don't hear many leaders using that language. And I think a lot of the problems that we are facing in the workplace right now, or indeed the wider world, could be fixed by people really doing that and committing to it as well. Don't just do it once and think you've ticked the box.
It's got to be a way of life rather than an event, hasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think so.
Do you think we've solved all the world's problems now?
I think you and I have, definitely.
Well,
yeah. But no, I think I think there's a lot of work to do, isn't there, really? And we're not seeing that level of leadership in the world, our world leaders right now. And I think that's where there's a lot of people who are disgruntled and wanting better.
And of course the trickle down effect of that is not good. So a lot of work to do.
There is lots of work to do.
That's been great, Michaela. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been good fun.
Hopefully it's been useful to people.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.